So I'm going to teach you how to use different chemicals to test for different molecules in foods. And then the molecules you're going to be testing for are lipids or fats, proteins, and starches. So we're actually going to bring different foods into the classroom for you to test to see which molecules are in which foods, to give you a better sense of what we're getting out of the foods we eat. And by now you should have a little sense of how those foods break down in your body, but we're going to be looking more at that in the coming days. So the first thing I think you need to do is to make a table to record your learning. And I would do this directly in your journal. If you don't have your journal right now, maybe you can put it on another sheet of paper and then you can tape it into your journal. But a table is the best way to record this kind of learning. So as I said, we're going to test for 3 different molecules: starches, proteins, and lipids. Lipids, remember, are another word for fats. You're going to do a brief description of the test, the positive results, so what happens, for example, if there are starches, and then the negative results, what happens if there are not starches. So then by the end you'll be able to use this table. We'll give you a whole bunch of food and you'll be able to do these tests on all the different foods and say, like, well, this one has starches and proteins, or this one has all 3, or this one has lipids and starches. And so you'll be using this table in order to do that kind of testing. So the first thing is I'm going to show you how to do a starch test. So I have 2 test tubes here and I'm going to add this starch. So I just bought this starch from a science company. And I'm going to add the starch to this test tube. In this test tube I'm going to keep just water. So water doesn't have any proteins, lipids, or starches in it. So that's always going to be what's called my negative control. So to show what happens if there isn't that thing in it. So now I've added the starch to this test tube. You can see it's kind of a whitish color. And I'm going to add iodine to both test tubes. Iodine is going to be my chemical indicator in this case. And I'm adding 5 drops of iodine to each test tube. So this is actually my daughter adding the iodine. So again, that's about 5 drops to each test tube. And then as you can see, in the test tube that had starch, the iodine turned like a dark blue or even a black color. In the test tube that was just water, so no starch, it just stayed a yellowy color. So if there is starch, it's going to turn a dark blue or black. If there's not starch, it's going to remain yellow. One nice thing about the starch test is if I have something solid, like a solid piece of food, say an apple instead of some apple juice, I can actually put 1 drop of iodine right on the substance. So here I put a drop of iodine on a piece of paper. Paper actually has starch in it. That's what gives it the nice white color. They use a starch. And then I put another drop on a styrofoam cup. Styrofoam does not have starch in it. So you see the same result, but I don't have to liquefy it or anything like that. So the dark brown color is starch. The light yellow color is no starch. So now I can go back to my table and I can say for starches I'm going to add some iodine. I might say this could be liquid or solid. For positive results it's going to turn a dark blue or a black. And for negative results, it's going to remain yellow. So let's now go on to the protein test. And obviously, if you're not done with writing stuff for the starch test, please go ahead and pause the video so you can get everything written down. So the protein test, again, I've got a test tube here of protein, and you can see it's kind of a different color than the water. I've added some gelatin. So the same stuff that Jell-O is made out of has a ton of protein in it. It's actually pretty much pure protein. And so I've added that to the water in my protein test tube and then just water in my other test tube. And this time I'm going to use a chemical called Biuretes. So you can see how to spell it right there on the container. So just like before, I'm going to add 5 drops of the Biuretes to the protein and then to the water. And now you can see the test tube with the protein, the Biuretes turned purple, whereas it's a little hard to see, but the test tube with the water, it stayed a light blue color. Now, unfortunately, unlike the starch test, if you had solids, you can't just drop biorets like onto the protein. So you may have to mash it up. So this is called a mortar and pestle, and the mortar is the bowl and the pestle is the masher. You don't need to remember that. But what you would do is you would take a little bit of your food and just a little water, and you would mash it up to get like a mush. And then you could test some of the mush to see if there's protein in that. And you'll notice I've done all of this against a nice white background, so I'm using a whiteboard just so I can really make sure of the color. Against the dark lab tables, it can sometimes be hard, or against kind of the chaos of a classroom. So this is where a whiteboard or even just a piece of paper comes in handy. And now I can go back to my table, and I can say for proteins, I can add biorets directly to liquids, but that I need to mash solids with some water, and then I can test the water. I mean, I can test it with a little bit of the mash in it, that's fine, but I definitely have to get some good mashing going on. And then positive results turn purple, and negative results, meaning there's no protein, turns blue, or stays blue. So then my last one is lipids. This is a bit of a different test. We're not going to use any chemicals. What we're going to use, it's literally called the brown paper test. And most of you are actually aware of this test. This is like when you go and you get pizza in a brown cardboard box, or you get fries in a bag, and you notice that you can kind of see the oil coming through. So lipids are fats, and you actually have or another word for fats are lipids, but there's actually two kinds. There are fats and there are oils. Now the only difference is fats come from animals, so like the fat in cheese would be a fat, whereas oils come from plants, so like olive oil is an oil. But they're both in the same category called lipids. So I take just a little bit of brown paper towel, and on one I've put a drop of oil, and on the second I've put a drop of water. And now I need to wait approximately 15 minutes. Now the way I actually set this up was that I set this up right at the beginning when I came into the classroom. Then I did the protein test, then I did the starch test, then I came back to the lipid test, because really I'm just waiting. Now if I have a solid, instead of a drop, what I would do is kind of like press the item between the brown paper until a little bit of liquidy stuff comes out. Whether that's water or oil remains to be seen. But like I could take an apple and kind of pat the apple down so that all of that liquid is on the brown paper. After my 15 minutes, I see really nothing's changed with the oil, but the water is mostly evaporated. So that's my test. I know if that liquid that comes out of the substance is an oil or a fat. If it's a lipid, it's not going to evaporate. If it's a water, then it is. And so I can say, place substances on brown paper towel, squeeze out some liquid, wait about 15 minutes. And if it doesn't evaporate, that's a positive result for lipids. If it evaporates, that's a negative result for lipids. So what we're going to do in class then, as I said, is I'm going to give you a bunch of foods, and then you're going to determine what foods contain what substances. If you have any questions, please make sure you're asking in class so that you understand how to do the tests. Have a good day.